This fighter jet wasn't supposed to exist yet. Not like this, and definitely not in public. But on a cold winter day over Chengdu, China rolled out a jet that looked like it belonged in the 2040s, not the mid-2020s. This is why China's new tailless stealth jet is very real, and why it's built to worry the West. Starting with the why. For years, China has watched from a distance how the US fights its wars. American stealth fighters, bombers, and carrier groups move like one system, all backed by big tanker fleets and powerful networks that let jets hit targets an ocean away and still make it home. China doesn't have that luxury. Many of its forward air bases sit inside the range of US and Allied missiles. Tankers and big support aircraft would be some of the first things targeted in a real fight. So if Beijing really wants to challenge the US and its partners in the Western Pacific, it can't just copy the American playbook. It needs something else. What do you build if your bases aren't safe and your tankers can't always save you? You build one aircraft that can go deep on its own, see farther than the enemy, manage unmanned wingmen, and still hit hard by itself. That idea sits at the core of this new design. A long-range, sixth-generation style airborne cruiser meant to live inside dangerous airspace and quietly tilt the entire fight in China's favor. The story of that jet started long before anyone saw it. In the late 2010s, Chinese industry and the PLA Air Force were already looking past the J-20 and talking openly about sixth-generation concepts. More range, more sensors, more unmanned teaming, and more emphasis on information dominance instead of pure dogfighting. By around 2018 to 2019, officials in state media were hinting that work on a new generation of fighters had begun, and U.S. Air Force leaders were publicly warning that China was chasing the same core idea behind America's own next-generation air dominance program, one crewed aircraft at the center, linking missiles, drones, and sensors into a single kill web. At first, it all sounded like theory. Then, the shapes started to leak. In the early 2020s, satellite photos and long lens shots from Chengdu picked up something odd. A large, tailless jet on the ramp with diamond-shaped wings, a broad blended nose, and a very clean, stealthy layout that didn't match the J-20. In 2023, China's main aviation conglomerate pushed the tease even further, publishing sleek renders of a similar stealth design. No tails, big wings, and a futuristic look that matched what Western Air Forces were sketching for their own sixth-gen projects. You could still dismiss that as concept art until late December 2024, when that outline finally appeared in the air. On a cold morning over Chengdu, spotters watched two unfamiliar jets taxi out. The smaller one drew some interest. The big one stole the show. It was large, tailless, almost a flying wing, with three closely spaced exhausts under the trailing edge and a bold test number on the nose. A twin-seat J-20S in yellow primer rolled behind it as a chase plane, a quiet confirmation that this wasn't a Photoshop. This was Chengdu's new project on its first public flight. Within hours, everyone online was calling it the J-36, even though China hasn't officially named it. And that date? Not random. The flight was widely reported to have taken place on December 26th, Mao Zedong's birthday, which turned a basic test hop into a signal. Beijing didn't hold a press conference, but it also didn't rush to scrub the clips from social media. Videos spread, analysts froze frames, and suddenly every defense briefing had that same black triangle silhouette on the slides. Up close, this J-36 looks less like a classic fighter and more like a compact stealth bomber. It's long and wide, with the wing and fuselage blended into one smooth shape. There are no vertical tails and no obvious extra surfaces sticking up into the radar picture. A single, sharp leading edge runs from the nose into the wings, stripping away the angles and corners where radar waves like to bounce. So is this China's answer to America's next-gen air dominance jet, or something even more flexible? That's the question everyone's trying to solve now. Under the wing, things get even more interesting, at least from what you can see in the photos. The leading edge appears to bend in 2 stages so the jet can handle the tricky transonic zone and then go comfortably supersonic. All the visible control work happens along the trailing edge, where long moving panels steer the jet, and split surfaces near the tips can act like built-in tails for yaw and roll. Even the doors, panel lines, and hinge edges line up with the airflow, so radar waves are more likely to slide past than bounce straight back to a radar dish. Why look like a clean target if you can look like background noise? Then you get to the air and fire. Imagery shows at least 3 intakes feeding what appear to be 3 engines, 2 low on the blended wing route and 1 higher up behind the cockpit. The shapes are carved to stay stealthy from the front while still feeding a lot of air at high speed. At the back, the first prototype's exhausts sit in shallow trenches under the trailing edge. Newer shots suggest follow-on prototypes are experimenting with boxier nozzle shapes that could support thrust vectoring, or at least help with control at high angles of attack. But nobody outside China can say for sure yet. What really caught analysts' eyes were the doors along the belly. Freeze frames and satellite images suggest a very large central weapons bay, flanked by 2 smaller ones. That big center bay looks long enough to take China's largest beyond visual range air-to-air missiles or serious anti-ship weapons that would never fit inside smaller fighters. Open-source assessments have already speculated about long-range PL-15/PL-17 class missiles for killing support aircraft, and YJ-12-style supersonic anti-ship weapons for going after big surface targets. On each side of that central space, the 2 smaller bays are natural homes for medium-range AAMs, short-range self-defense missiles, or extra sensors depending on the mission. The point of all that internal volume is simple. This jet hates clutter. It doesn't want weapons hanging off the wings like a Christmas tree. It wants to stay clean, keep its radar signature low, and still roll in with serious long-range missiles, precision strike weapons, or a blend of both. Older designs have to pick stealth or payload. This thing is trying very hard to say, why not both? Now the fun part, the engines. Most fighters stop at 1 or 2. This design appears to shrug and bolt in 3. Sounds like overkill, right? But is it? Those 3 modern turbofans do a lot on paper. First, raw shove. 3 engines let you push a large stealth airframe fast enough to matter, even when it's heavy with fuel and weapons. Analysts think top speed will likely sit somewhere in the high subsonic to low supersonic range most of the time, with the option to sprint harder when needed, probably not Mach 2.5 all day, but fast enough to reposition quickly over the Pacific. Second, backup. Out over open ocean, an engine problem doesn't have to mean punch out and hope somebody finds you. Lose one, and in theory, the other 2 can still drag you home. If you're flying long legs over contested water, would you rather bet on 2 engines or 3? The third benefit is the sneaky one: power. 3 big engines mean a lot of electrical juice, and 6th-gen toys are power-hungry. Big AESA radar, side-looking arrays, aggressive jammers, thick data links, maybe even directed energy weapons down the line. All that gear wants watts. With this setup, the J-36 concept doesn't need to choose between see everything and jam everything. In theory, it can do both at once. How do you fight something that sees you first and starts blinding you at the same time? Nobody outside the program knows the exact range yet, but the rough picture is clear. This is a big airframe with a lot of fuel volume and long wings optimized for cruise, not just sprinting. Open source estimates suggest a combat radius well beyond current Chinese fighters, into the thousands of kilometers, with a ferry range that reaches deep across the Philippine Sea and out toward Guam if the numbers pan out. The exact figures are guesswork for now. But the design goal is obvious: push China's reach farther out without leaning on vulnerable tankers. That's the real play here. The goal is to break the old pattern where China needs to drag along refuelers just to show up near US and allied forces. This new jet is built to launch from the mainland, push far forward, and bring the fight to them with minimal support. Up front, the airframe wears that job on its face. That wide, flattened nose isn't just for drama. It's the perfect place to hide a huge AESA radar, plus infrared and electro-optical sensors and side-looking arrays that can be blended into the skin without wrecking stealth. Above that, a two-seat cockpit sits under a dark canopy. One crew member flies and keeps the jet alive. The other runs drones, long-range shots, and electronic tricks. And AI software is likely there to glue all the radar, IR, and data link feeds into one big picture the crew can actually use. Would you rather fly blind or sit inside your own airborne command center? That's why calling it just a fighter or a bomber feels wrong. It's more like a flying boss room. It leads, it directs, and it still carries a ridiculous amount of firepower in its belly. If you're a regular 4th-gen jet, do you really want to see this thing pop up on your radar scope? And the crazy part? For something that looks straight out of concept art, progress has been fast. After the first public flight at Chengdu near the end of 2024, more imagery leaked in the following months. New angles showed that wide sensor nose, the mix of intakes above and below, a panel behind the top inlet that might pop up for extra airflow or cooling, and those 3 bay doors under the fuselage. Not long after, satellite shots appeared to show a similar airframe parked at a remote test base in western China that analysts compare to a Chinese Area 51. If this was just a prop for propaganda, would they move it out there and keep flying it? So what are they actually building? Chinese sources frame it as their take on a 6th-generation jet, and even give it a soft nickname, the ginkgo leaf, after its outline. U.S. Air Force leaders talk about it as a serious future air-to-air problem, not a toy. And independent analysts see a mix of roles in one hull: heavy fighter, mini bomber, interceptor, and drone swarm quarterback all in one. If they pull that off, how do you even label it anymore? The loadout basically decides this jet's mood. Load it with very long-range air-to-air missiles in the big bay and medium-range ones in the side bays, and it becomes a long-distance hitman. It can cruise just outside enemy air defenses, borrow targeting data from other jets and drones, and fire from so far away the target might not even know it's been launched on until the missile goes active. How do you fight something that tags you before you even know it's there? Swap that for anti-ship missiles, and the personality changes completely. Now it's a carrier hunter. It can sit beyond the horizon, climb just enough to grab a firing solution, launch on a strike group, and then fade back into the noise before defenses really spin up. Would you want to be the captain trying to sleep with that thing somewhere out there? Fill the bays with precision strike weapons, and it becomes a base killer. Radars, runways, fuel farms, command posts deep in theater, it can go after all of them from range while still looking small on enemy screens. One airframe, 3 very different personalities. And here's the thing, it doesn't always need to be the one pulling the trigger. Because it's built for long endurance, it can just orbit near contested space and act like a flying war room. It listens to satellites, ground radars, other jets, drones, pulls all that input together, and sends back a clean picture to the rest of the force. In that mode, its main weapon isn't a missile at all, it's information. Put that reach, payload, and brain power together, and you see why Western planners don't love seeing its outline in satellite shots. It doesn't just add one more fighter, it adds a new kind of problem. Where do you put your bases now? American jets like the F-22 and F-35 are still monsters in their own lanes. But they were built for a slightly different world. The F-22 is a knife fighter in the sky, meant to dominate airspace close enough to friendly tankers and bases that endurance isn't everything. The F-35 gives you stealth plus flexibility in a smaller package. Neither was designed to cruise thousands of kilometers alone, run a pack of drones, and haul ship-killer weapons in the same trip. So what happens when they're suddenly playing on a much bigger board? On paper, this new Chinese jet doesn't erase them. What it does is shove the map around. Forward bases that once felt comfortably out of reach now sit inside its possible strike envelope. Carrier groups that used to push into certain lines might have to hang back farther, which slows down how fast they can shape a fight. Air defense networks tuned for closer, more predictable threats now have to watch deeper for a stealthy coordinator, not just a simple attacker. It also puts heat on Western timelines. When this prototype first showed up, U.S. Air Force leaders said they weren't shocked China was chasing this kind of design. They've been expecting it. But they also called it a clear signal to keep pushing their own next-gen programs, not cut corners. The U.S. Navy and Air Force have been wrestling with budgets and delays on replacements for the F-22 and F/A-18. Seeing a Chinese 6th-gen style prototype running real-world tests and potentially entering service sooner than some expected makes the "stay the course" argument a lot louder. None of that means this jet is an easy win for China. Stealth aircraft are a nightmare to mass produce. Tiny tolerances, advanced composites, fragile coatings, insanely tight layouts inside. China has already proven with the J-20 that it can field a 5th-gen fighter in meaningful numbers. But this goes a step further. 3 engines instead of 1 or 2, a more exotic tailless airframe, and a 2-seat cockpit packed with high-end avionics and AI. Can they scale that up without hitting a wall? That's the part nobody knows yet. Look past the hardware, and the real story becomes the people who have to make this thing work. Training for a jet like this isn't teach them to dogfight and fire missiles. Pilots have to fly the aircraft, manage drones, read huge amounts of sensor data, and run electronic warfare all at once. They're basically mission commanders in the air. That means new tactics, new simulators, and new playbooks that show how this jet links up with China's missile forces, ships, and unmanned aircraft. On the ground, the pressure doesn't stop. Crews have to keep 3 advanced engines healthy, protect those stealth surfaces, and make sure every radar, camera, and data link is talking to everything else. If they slip, this advantage quickly becomes a shiny hangar queen. There's also a real chance the jets we've seen so far aren't just early and late prototypes, but different flavors of the same idea. One configuration might lean hard into long-range strikes and drone control, another into air-to-air dominance, while China tests what mix actually works best in its own war plans. But the big picture is hard to miss. In less than a decade, China went from slick concept art to a real airframe. Huge, stealthy, triple-engined, and tailless. It doesn't copy the F-22 or the B-2. It's built for a region where tankers are targets, bases sit under missile arcs, and whoever sees first and coordinates fastest has the edge. If clear, no-nonsense breakdowns like this help you make sense of that future, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive.